Growing up, I was taught to be proud of my heritage. I learned where my ancestors came from, their struggles and their victories, and I learned about my culture and its traditions, from the clothing to the temples to the festivals and holidays. And I remember growing up in America. I was born in California, which meant that I wasn't always surrounded by people who looked like me. But that was okay, because I felt that my culture made me different in a good way. I was about 7 years old, and I was sitting at lunch with a group of people. I was ready to eat my food, spoon in hand, when someone asked, "Do your people eat your food with your hands?" At the time, I thought it was a genuine question, and proudly answered, "Yes, we do. It's a part of our culture." She then proceeded to grab my food and shove her hands in it, pretending to eat with her hands, mocking me and making a mess. Soon, everyone in the group joined in, pretending to eat my food with their hands, laughing at me and calling me names. They called me a pig. They called my people pigs because we ate with our hands and they didn't. If they had asked the genuine question, I could have told them that we eat with our hands as a sign of respect, that it has spiritual and religious meaning. But I remember being so shocked that day, so shocked that something so small could be so divisive that I couldn't get any words out of my mouth. But looking back, it was just words. And they were kids, so maybe they didn't understand what they were saying. Either way, it didn't change who I am, and it hasn't changed how proud I am of my culture. And while it was hurtful, I wasn't in any danger. I am lucky. I am so incredibly fortunate. I have grown up in a loving family, never having to worry about the roof over my head. And I have grown up in an environment that has allowed me to learn about my culture and proudly practice it. I have never had to question my place in this world, and I have never once had to question my safety. The same cannot be said for others, which is why when I had the chance to do some research, I decided to look into why there are so many cultural misperceptions and what the dangers of these misperceptions are, specifically after 9/11, a tragic event that was followed by so much violence and hatred towards the Muslim community. I began my search by looking at media and found that perspective has so much to do with how information is presented. Westerners tend to have a preconceived notion on what Middle Eastern society is like, and often try to apply Western societal norms to those situations. This can be seen in examples of when differences between these two regions are assumed to be because of religion alone. However, as said by Professor of Anthropology Leila Abulugod, it is just as unhelpful to reduce the complex politics, social dynamics, and diversity of lives in the US to Christianity as it is to reduce these things to Islam. A good example of this concept can be seen with the controversy surrounding hijabs. Many Westerners believe that women are in need of liberation from items such as hijabs or niqabs, but fail to realize that many women choose to wear these items as a part of their religion and as a part of their identity. However, it is true that women have been forced to wear these coverings before, but even in these cases, it is not religion alone that keeps them from acting freely. Even after the fall of the Taliban, who were notorious for using religion to oppress women, women are still depicted as wearing burqas. This is because society will not suddenly accept a new, more free role for women, a concept that stems from ingrained sociocultural norms, not just religion. The media coverage surrounding the Middle East is often very specific to the horrors that occur, and often ends up reinforcing preconceived perspectives that people already have about certain groups. This means that people then use these preconceived perspectives to categorize people into groups that have oversimplified labels, such as calling all Muslims terrorists. These oversimplifications allow people to avoid the root of the problem by blaming the religion as a whole instead of looking to the political and socioeconomic environment that cultivated the problem. Especially now with social media platforms such as Twitter or Instagram, it's easier than ever for people to spread information that is incorrect or incomplete. Anyone can see an event and post something about it online, which makes it even more important for us as individuals to be aware of where our information comes from and what type of bias it may have. But oppression and misrepresentation has occurred for centuries throughout the world, from dowry disputes in India to body mutilations such as foot bindings in China. Yet the US has been fixated on the Middle East. This can be attributed to the context of the situation. Following the 9/11 attack, the US began the war on terror in the Middle East. The war initially began as a necessary response to 9/11, but eventually morphed into a war of choice. While it was continually preached that the US was eliminating threats such as the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and saving the people oppressed by them, the goals of the war eventually shifted to securing policy and military objectives and eventually created a stigma around an entire religion, as seen by labels such as the war on Islam rather than calling it the war on terror. It cannot be denied that many Afghans have undergone incredible hardship, but in this case, pre-existing bias was taken advantage of to further stereotype a group of people in order to justify continuing a war. Even with the media coverage surrounding the war on terror, there was extreme bias on which reports even came to the surface. For example, of the 89 terror attacks that occurred in the US from 2013 to 2017, the 11 that were Muslim-led received 44% of media coverage, while the 18 attacks that had targeted Muslims were rarely reported. This type of media coverage only encourages the perspective of guilty by association, which can lead to violence and even escalate to the death of innocent people. Balbir Singh Sodhi was the first of many Sikh men to be killed in the revenge killings that took place in the US after 9/11. He was killed simply because he wore a turban and had a beard, and therefore fit the stereotype of what a Muslim terrorist was supposed to look like. Despite the fact that he was innocent, he was still shot 5 times. And the violence didn't end there. There have since been countless instances of people being shot or beaten to death simply because of the way they looked. Cultural misperception can have horrible, violent, and cruel consequences for certain groups of people, which makes it even more important for us as individuals to take on the responsibility of being both aware and accepting of the differences we have with each other, no matter how small or how big. Instead of taking the one perspective that is fed to the masses, we must each strive to look at the different perspectives that make up the world and take a look at how our own bias was formed before looking at a situation, with the hope that we will one day be able to reduce the violent and cruel effects of cultural misperception. Thank you.